Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of Education Talk here at CCTV. I'm your host, Priyanka Deo. I am super excited. We have a great season ahead of us, so let's begin. An overwhelming amount of data supports that study and participation in the fine arts, including music, theater, stage, and song, is an essential component in improving learning in all academic areas. Evidence articulates that besides enhancing creativity, it reduces student dropout rates at the elementary, high school, and college levels, and even fosters a love for learning. Additionally, brain research shows that the arts develop neural systems that lead to improved emotional balance, finer motor skills, and enhanced creativity. To speak more about fine arts and education, I am very pleased to welcome our first expert of today, Dr. Louise Pascale, a professor and veteran in creative arts, having now contributed 30 years to the field and internationally recognized for the Afghan Children's Songbook and Literacy Project Incorporated, which is a fascinating project aimed at preserving children's songs during years of war and oppression in Afghanistan. Dr. Pascale, welcome to the show, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So my first question to you is, what you were in Afghanistan in the 60s, correct?
Right.
And this kind of motivated you to start this project, at
Right.
least. So it's a long time since the 60s, but can you tell me why you were there and how this idea came into fruition?
Right. Yes, I graduated from college in music and education and went into the Peace Corps. Late 60s, 66 to 68. They assigned me to Kabul, Afghanistan, and I was assigned to be an English teacher.
Okay.
So the Peace Corps, fortunately, allows you to do anything else if the government agrees. So I was interested in music.
The U.S. government or?
The Afghan government.
Okay.
So you have to kind of, suggest a proposed idea, and they say yes. So I really, really wanted to get into schools and teach music, or I was curious about children's music. So I found a poet and musician to work with. They taught me the songs. I didn't have a tape recorder. I was writing everything down, trying to get the music in my head. I had a little funny harmonium thing. It's like sort of like an accordion. And I tromped into the schools. I had the kids illustrate all the songs with my crayons that I had from the Peace Corps. And we had a great time. The children loved it. They particularly loved a song that's very typical of our Old MacDonald song called Ali Baba, but he has a garden with all these animals, rabbits and things. So
great.
Love that. So the song was published when I left. The Kabul Press published like 2,000 copies, and they gave it mostly to schools in Kabul. And by the way, this is a very peaceful time in Afghanistan. It's like the most...
It's hard to imagine that.
Yeah, people really just sort of sigh when I tell them that I was there then. Mm-hmm. And then I went home and I went on with my life, and all sorts of things happened over many, many, many years. But then when the Peace Corps is a pretty profound experience, and you sort of keep your ear to the ground, and I kept listening to things that were happening. And when I heard that there were many things, we had the Russians invading and the Civil War and lots of things, but when the Taliban came in, they banned all the music. They destroyed instruments.
And when was this?
That started in the early 90s, but each group of people started to actually censor music. Each group that was taking over. The radio was starting to be censored of what could be played, but by the time the Taliban really censored it, no instruments were allowed, no sound. Mothers could not hum to their children.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
So it was silenced. Mm-hmm. And in a way, Afghans will say they dehumanized us by taking that away. One man says in a BBC documentary, when they took our music, they took our soul. So I'm listening to all this, and then I'm suddenly realizing, one day I was going to teach some of the songs to my Lesley University students, and I thought, oh my Lord, I actually can't remember all these songs, and in fact, and I can't read the Farsi anymore. And in fact, they're not my songs. They belong back to Afghanistan, and they belonged back to the children. And I have kind of an interest in traditional music, and I realized that these 16 songs, this collection, could be gone. Like a generation of children and or more have not even heard them.
Wow.
So I decided I needed to return them, not knowing at all how to do this. Standing in my living room, I should just return.
How every great plan starts.
So a lot of networking, a lot of just emailing anyone I could email, checking it out with Afghans. Is this really a good idea? Would you think this was a good idea? Finally, I found somebody suggested I reach this musician in Toronto, Afghan guy who is actually quite famous, goes back and forth. I sent him the book, a copy of my old book, and I said, what do you think? Here's my idea. And he tells me, burst into tears when he saw the songs, because it was like, it's like in your consciousness, but it's not. It's like when we hear a song that we hear, it's like, oh my God, I sang that when I was on a bus going to camp, when I was 7 or something. So he said, we have to do it. So he got a bunch of kids together, Afghan kids. He said, we have to have a CD. We redid the book. I found an Afghan group that would print it. And we started printing the books, and then we had to distribute them. The whole thing in a way is kind of functioned on a little bit of a miracle. Like sometimes I think, whoa, how did this kind of happen? But so anyway, and then in 2009, so we motored along, and then in 2009, I went back to really assess the project. Is it going like I think it is? I've been hearing from people, but I thought I need to go back and look. So I traveled around, very different place. I had to always be accompanied. I couldn't go out without a headscarf. People didn't want me to go to the bazaar by myself. But we traveled to many villages, and I delivered books to some, and some I went that I knew they already had the books because I wanted to see what was happening. And all the teachers said to me, we need more books, and we need another book that has even more Pashto songs, Pashto and Dari being the national languages. Right. So I came back with those ideas, but I saw what I noticed in several schools where the kids who had the books were not only singing all the songs, but reading. And my educator self was like, oh my God, they're reading. This is so fabulous. So then I thought, how am I going to, I've always wanted that to happen. I mean, I really needed the songs back, but I wanted to increase literacy, because literacy this is something that's got to happen in Afghanistan. So I worked with Afghans, and I created a teacher's guide that's now accompanies every songbook. So the teachers now have a way to in fact, what you just said in your introduction, increase creativity, increase critical thinking, increase problem-solving skills. So they're not learning by rote, which is the traditional way to learn in Afghanistan, but in fact they're learning much deeper, because they're not just singing the song, they're thinking, like Grandmother Swings, that song, they're saying, well, what would I do with my grandmother? What they're thinking bigger, and they're asking questions. And
so it's clearly having your songs the book itself is clearly having an impact.
It is. It's the teachers. So there's 50,000 books now. That's
incredible.
2 books, songbooks, and we're working on the 3rd one.
So there was one picture that we have, and I'd like to share, that you've given to us. And thank you very much for that. But there's one picture, of children looking at this book, and they're looking with such curiosity. And I was just wondering, would you be able to describe these pictures that you've shared?
Yeah, this is what sort of knocked my socks off. That the kids, well, first of all, you have to know that this book in many places is, even though kindergarten with 250 kids, it was the only book they had. So that's the first kind of, I was a bit shocked, but glad they had it. And they really are looking at it. They're probably listening to the CD. They're singing along. And like kids anywhere, music is joyful, and it's their songs, and it's about fun things. Afghan kids' songs are very poetic. They're about beautiful things about Afghanistan, the mountains, the flowers, springtime, the birds. So but they're also trying to read the words. So it's kind of a double thing. There's one picture of a bunch of kids all together. Those kids are actually in an orphanage in Kabul. They had the books for a year, and when I went back to see them, they had actually worn out all the books. So I gave them a second copy of everything.
So what is the progress now? I know you have a website. I know that you're doing some fundraising as well, and this project has literally gone viral. I mean, it's recognized all over the world, and it's clear that it's impacting these kids because, as you said, it's the only book that they had, which surprised me as well. I didn't know that.
I know, it's a little shocking, but it's, I think a couple things. We're on to the third book. So the woman who collected the second song, so I collected essentially the first songs. The second song's book, an Afghan woman said, I really want to help with this project. She went back, collected all the songs, so that's 16 more songs. And they're in, by the way, Dari, Farsi, and also Hazaragi and Uzbeki. And then she came back and said, wait a minute, the folktales, the traditional children's folktales are disappearing too. So she went back last summer, talked to all these elders, collected 6 folktales. So we're in the midst of compiling those, fundraising for that.
Okay.
And hoping that by next spring, this coming spring, we can really get that book out and published, and Afghans are totally excited about it.
Well, let me ask you one question, which, since you're very close to the country, you're very passionate about this project. That's very, very evident. But what do you see as the future of this project, as an educator? How do you see it impacting the country, it seems like, at this point?
Well, I've never quite known, to be honest, where it was going to go from day one. In fact, I didn't start out with a nonprofit. I hooked onto somebody else's because I thought, gee, maybe this thing will last a year and it'll fizzle out. I don't know. So it's hard for me to predict, but I would love it to be, my main job is to be the fundraiser, and most of it's all run by Afghans. It's their music.
That's
it should
great.
be run that way. But I would love it to be taken on by an Afghan organization. There's a couple of big Afghan education organizations in Afghanistan now that are doing a lot of teacher training, and I'm working closely with them.
Great.
So I would imagine what I would love to do is continue to collect songs, maybe more folktales, honor other of the ethnic groups that we could get other stories from, songs from. So who knows? I mean, people love it. And by the way, it's also been useful. Who knew? We have a lot of Afghan refugees across the country, in our country, as well as I get orders for books from Germany, from England, so it's finding its way in other places, which is great. And I have to say, music does touch our souls. So what I hear from teachers in this country is, oh, this child has arrived, doesn't know anyone, doesn't speak English, is sitting there a bit solemn, and then they hear their music and they just, it's their language, it's their light up. So it feels like it's, I didn't even think about that when I started it.
Is there a way that, now I've checked out the website and it is fantastic. Would you be able to share what your website has and how we can donate to it?
Yes, well, thank you. Yes, it's easy, afghansongbook.org. And the website has videos, so you actually can see and hear kids singing. It has a short story of how I got it all started. A list of other things that we've done, like I did a TED Talk, and there's other links to other things. So, but I think primarily photographs, and then to me the videos come to. I think the sort of a second thing that's always I felt important about this project is to share another perspective about Afghanistan. We often hear about the war and terrorism, and we don't. For me, I find Afghanistan to be, the Afghans to be this incredibly wonderful, warm, generous people. And when you see these children singing, they look like kids anywhere in the world. They're just joyful and they're singing. And I think it's nice to see that perspective. It's one of many, but it's...
And it's a perspective that definitely needs to be seen, for sure, because the world has not seen that side of Afghanistan at all.
No.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you for being the first guest on our show.
Thank you.
Very, very insightful. This is a great project. And we'll be right back with our second guest talking about music therapy. Welcome back to Education Talk. Our second guest today, Eva Steward, a music therapy assistant for Note Able Music, a nonprofit music therapy service for people with various disabilities. Eva also graduated with a degree in electronic music composition and voice. Eva, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So my first question to you is, what exactly is music therapy?
So that's a good question because most people don't know. So music therapy is the use of music in order to achieve non-musical goals. So that can range from if you need developmental goals or social goals or even medical goals that people need to achieve in order to fulfill like certain expectations.
So give me an example of what a music therapist does.
So currently I am at Boston Children's Hospital, and one of the things that is done is that we go into rooms with patients. We'll have songs, and in these songs these children will be able to possibly move for the first time or verbalize for the first time. So a music therapist uses music as the base in a session in order to motivate a patient or a client, or possibly soothe a patient or a client. So it is very broad, and so you have to really utilize music in a way that is for that specific person rather than going in. You can't go into a session thinking, oh, I'm going to do this, this, and this, because it changes. And so because music actually accesses the entire brain, you don't know how a session is going to go.
Yeah. Okay. So then my next question to you is, when you supposedly go in and see a patient, how do you assess what you need to do? Because it seems that every session is different.
Yeah, so typically the assessment is done within the first minute or so, because we do some sort of a hello song or some sort of a welcome song where we set the base that, because in a lot of situations the client is nonverbal. So for example, we give them that song in order to look at how they're maybe interacting with the music or possibly spending time like interacting with us through the music. And in that time, you'll be able to tell what they need in that specific session.
And what do they need in your experience?
So a lot of the times patients will need music in order to possibly move. So right now I've seen a lot of patients where what it is that you give them a maraca per se, and they're actually gripping it for the first time. So it's allowing them to develop in a way that they can't typically develop because it gives them that sort of extra push.
Okay. And are there any particular instances, which I'm sure you have, of people actually improving based on music therapy? Yeah.
So previous to my time at Leslie, you said earlier, I worked at a nonprofit called Notable's Music Therapy Services. And I had this one client, and he actually was nonverbal and really displayed, he's 17 and he was nonverbal, and he still had not had any sort of communication. And we did this thing where on the piano, they'll put different stickers with a color that relates to a note. And typically he would need a sort of, we would point at each note, right? And he wouldn't be able to follow it unless you followed it. And so that actually happened for about 6 months, where he would just have to watch you the whole way. But by the end of the sessions, he was able to play 8 bars on his own. So
that's incredible.
Yeah, so it really had accessed his brain, and one of the things that it had also done is taught him how to walk down and upstairs. So before he had spent time with music therapy, he wouldn't walk downstairs. So if something didn't have an elevator, he wouldn't use it. And so what they had done is that they had set up different stairs in a room and played music with him so that he would walk up the stairs and learn that that's not scary. So using that music as a way to demystify the stairs for him was something amazing. And now he walks up and down stairs, which is something that we take for granted. I know I personally do. I never would think about that. But music therapy actually allowed him to have more access to specific locations. So almost everywhere doesn't have an elevator. And so, yeah.
No, that's great. And you can see, it's great that you can see progress in your clients. And I know that you work at Boston Children's Hospital in the ICU unit.
Yeah.
Are there any, these are really hard cases to deal with, really hard clients, I would imagine, to deal with. What has been the most difficult one for you?
So I don't know if exactly one has been more difficult than another. For me, I think it's very difficult to see somebody so young in this situation, and being able to just be there in that space to them is really humbling. So just knowing that these children are in critical condition, it makes it more difficult than if I were going to work with a typical child who wouldn't have these illnesses. So it's really hard to explain, but like just being there makes it difficult, I think.
I can imagine. I mean, I can't even place myself in that situation. Would you be able to, I'm curious to know, would you be able to give us an example of, or a demonstration of what you do?
Yeah. So one of the things that I have really utilized recently is the use of hand motions in music, but not using words.
Okay.
So kind of humming a typical song. So I'm going to just show you through humming Itsy Bitsy Spider,
Great.
which is something that I didn't, before entering music therapy, I didn't think, oh, this has really good clinical applications.
Okay.
And now I'm really seeing that. So the hand motions would be just typical, like, So that sounds so basic to a lot of people, but it actually allows clients or patients to make eye contact or to really use tracking, which is something that's very difficult for children, especially if they spent a lot of time in the hospital or if they're an early intervention client. So
it's incredible because my eyes were on you the entire time and I was imagining the words of the song as you were doing the motions. It almost became easier, which is great.
One of the things that is important is understanding that you don't always need the words, because a lot of the times the music does the work on its own. Like you just said, it made you think like, oh, the itsy bitsy spider. And one of the important things is that adding that extra layer of the hand motion allows them to track and follow, and allows them to, at one point, they might start using their hands, and that might not be something that they typically do.
So how many people are, supposing you're not a musician, right?
Yeah.
Like I have, if I sang, I'm pretty sure a disaster will strike. But supposing I want to get involved, how can citizens that, don't have sort of a degree in music therapy or don't have any training in music therapy, how can we get involved in this?
Well, it would be possible to get involved by just singing more, because you said if you sing that it's going to be disastrous. I would definitely argue that anybody can sing. So one of the things that you should start doing, or people may want to start doing, is just using their voice, because it's something that's really accessible to so many of us and we don't think about that. And so using your voice more often, a lot of children may not have been sung to ever. And so just singing to children from a young age is really good, or singing to the elderly. So a lot of people may not be able to...
Where can we volunteer to do this, though?
Oh, so you can volunteer at a bunch of different places. For example, in this area, there are different nonprofits, or you can even volunteer at a hospital.
Okay.
So they do take a lot of hospital volunteers at Boston Children's, at Franciscan Children's, even at Beth Israel. You can go in and just volunteer. But at those, not everybody has a music therapist on staff. So it would be more just using music with patients, not the actual use of music therapy.
And what has been the impact of this? What have you seen? Have you seen a change in children? Have you seen them grow out of the experience? Have you seen them come out of what they're suffering from?
Yeah, so there is consistent progress, and there's a lot of proof. And there's a lot of research done on the use of music therapy, medical music therapy, which is what would be Boston Children's, or neurologic music therapy, community music therapy. So there is a lot of research done showing that. But from my personal perspective, just seeing a week-to-week change is huge. So you may seem like, oh, that session did not go well, but then the next week the child may remember your name, and that may not be something they've done, or they may actually grasp onto something, and that is a huge step for them, or they could make eye contact for the first time.
That's great. And it must be so rewarding doing this work. So thank you for doing it. It's a really great thing that you're doing.
Yeah,
So,
I'm very lucky to have a passion for it.
yeah, no, that's great. Well, that concludes our first episode of Education Talk. I want to thank our guests, Dr. Louise Pascale and Eva Steward, for joining. If you would like to donate to the Afghan Children's Literacy Project, we will include links right after this. Furthermore, if you want to volunteer and sing, which I may consider doing now that we've spoken, we'll include that information as well. Thanks for watching Education Talk. Until next time, this is Priyanka Deo, signing off.